Hi, welcome to our podcast, Mirror Mirror, where we talk about all things mental health and eating disorders. I'm your host for today, Sarah, a dietitian here at Sunol Hills, and we're joined by Dr. Vikas Duvvuri, a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and one of the co-founders of Sunol Hills. He's started multiple mental health programs. He's been involved in important research behind eating disorder treatment, and he's an adjunct professor at Stanford. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, happy to be here.
So the holidays tend to be a happy time for a lot of people, a time to unwind and, be with family. For our clients and people with eating disorders, that tends to not be the case. So tell us a little bit about why that is.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen with lots of folks, eating disorders have a lot to do with food-related practices, rituals, interactions at home. And although for most people, holidays are fun and relaxing and recharging, if you're walking into a situation where one of your biggest logistical triggers, nightmares, whatever, is going to be central to the whole event, it's going to feel bad. So I think that's kind of the simple aspect of it, maybe, which most people don't think about, because most people maybe don't think that much about food other than maybe they like it or they like the kinds of foods that they enjoy most of the time. And then with eating disorders, very different experience. So you end up in a situation where there's a lot of dread. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people who don't experience eating disorders, there's a sense of excitement for the food aspect. And for our clients, it's a lot of dread.
Yeah.
And that's just on the food side. But let's talk a little bit more about the environment too, because I think outside of the food, the family and like interpersonal challenges can come up a lot.
Yeah. I think the interpersonal part, I mean, it kind of leads off from what you were saying earlier, because the food environment will also trigger lots of history in terms of, oh, how did this go at this point of time? Usually when maybe that person was not eating what they were supposed to, or how they were supposed to, or kind of making their life worse, from a health perspective through eating disorders. And so there's a lot of that history and baggage. And I don't know that most families can look at their loved ones and just kind of forget or ignore that. Or maybe they're trying to, and maybe that shows through. So either way, a lot of tension between all parties. And so I think that's maybe, to your point, bigger challenge than the food itself, because there's a lot of unsaid trigger-worthy material that is going to come together.
Yeah, definitely. Our minds kind of hold on to those like past experiences. And if it hasn't gone well in the past, we're bound to feel really anxious going into it again. And I'm sure parents of children with eating disorders feel that way too. For any parents listening who might have a kid that's struggling, what would you want them to know going into the holidays?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that, although difficult, is important is at least to take on the posture of trying to make change happen. And by that, I mean, really the very first step, which is being open to the idea that this doesn't have to go as badly as the last time, whenever that was. And so that kind of goes into that whole dread situation we were talking about. So being open, and then ideally doing a little work to manage what you're going to do to improve the situation. And that obviously can be a function of the treatment team and other sort of maybe specific and professional pointers beyond sort of just family dynamics or attitude around being optimistic.
Yeah. And for, more older adolescents or adults that might be going home for the holidays, do you have any advice for them on dealing with, challenging family members that might make inappropriate comments around like food or, diet culture stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I think the simplest part is, what we tell folks in treatment, or remind them, which we know, which they know, maybe just needs that reminding because it's difficult and frustrating. You're not really going to change a lot of people out there, especially not in that 1 hour, 3 hour, whatever block.
Yeah.
And so the best you can figure out is how are you going to deal with it? And maybe slightly more fundamental, and maybe that goes to some of the first two questions, is what do you hope to get out of this? What is the goal of this? And hopefully through their treatment team, one of the things they've looked at and said, okay, I want this experience to turn to the positive. I don't want this to be this awful thing of the past. And I want to do what I can to steer it in a positive direction, because maybe that'll be a slightly positive template that I can then generalize to future food related events. Because otherwise people, as will withdraw from really social settings, because a lot of social settings have to do with food or some kind of calorie thing, whether it's drinks or something else. So
yeah, I think we see that a lot. Either we have patients who are isolating because they don't want to maybe take part in the food aspects that they're just not feeling ready for because they're still really challenging, or they might be farther along in their recovery and isolating because they're fearful of those triggers and those conversations that happen around them that, again, they might not feel ready for, even if they're, in a better place in their recovery. How would you suggest someone who's struggling with an eating disorder maybe talk to their family and, try to put up some boundaries around those types of comments?
Yeah, I think that's hard. I mean, as we've seen in practice, right? Like that's one of the things we hope they can pick up when they're in treatment, because a lot of them much rather avoid the entire thing altogether. It's much similar and much easier to what the eating disorder pattern looks like. So well practiced, no need to change a lot, no need to face a lot of unpleasant internal resistance to that change. So anyway, so the odds are unfortunately against you if you're trying to do this. So again, if there's a motivator, and hopefully there is, and there's a few, then the next step is maybe it is a little easier if there is outside help, right? So treatment team, whoever it is that they feel comfortable with. And then maybe that group, maybe 2 or 3 of them, can get together and say, okay, ground rules. We want this to work. And maybe that'll be a good chance for the family side to see, oh, okay, this young adult is not really out to just blow this thing up. They actually want this to go well. So why not do our part in trying to do that as well? So it may go beyond that. It may open up a connection maybe that was lost. Because there's a lot of resistance to even having normal, open, real conversations that are totally fraught at this point. And so it just leads to avoidance. So to me, that would be the first step, is that there has to be confidence building, there has to be trust building. And so maybe that happens through a slightly less problematic third party.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the challenges that come up are the unexpected or maybe expected comments from extended family, grandparents, uncles, whoever, who, feel okay commenting on, the client's body changing, or, rude comments like, "Oh, you sure you want to eat that?" What would you say as far as like what could either like the parents or the client potentially do to kind of like try to shut those comments down in a way that will, the path of least resistance?
Yeah. So path of least resistance is the key, I think, strategy there, because you could easily see people go at it and say, okay, I'm going to actually shut this person down. And if you do that, it's probably going to blow up. And so if your whole goal is, I'm going to make this fun and I'm going to make this not a problem, that is not what you're going to achieve. So instead, if you go by path of least resistance, then really what you're trying to do is, how do you manage it, right? Like, it's not how do I change someone. Grandma's going to be grandma. Like, you're not going to make big sort of character or personality changes in the 1 to 3 hour window that you're going to hang out there. So back to kind of the how-tos, I mean, what I would say fundamentally is to prepare a bit, not just in that moment, but actually ahead of time. Because people usually know who's coming. Maybe you're not used to folks being in the mix like that with you. Because maybe you're in treatment, you're now dealing with a different version of maybe a close family because everyone's sort of interacting in a way that you find better. But then there's other people that well, you haven't interacted with. And I think that's kind of where you're getting at, is that so in a way, it's actually quite predictable. All they have to do is like rewind and they will know, oh, yeah, this is what grandma or grandpa will say. And so at some level, that can be reviewed offline with family, with your treatment team, whoever you trust, to kind of do a little pre-game prep to figure out, okay, this is the stuff that's going to happen. You're going to have to be okay with this. Because again, let's be practical about what's doable. And then walk through a little bit on, okay, what's doable for you? How are you going to adjust to this? And just little strategies around like, where do you take it from there, right? You don't have to dwell on it. Okay, this person says something, let it roll off, move on, next thing. And maybe sometimes it is too much. And in that case, okay, what do you do for a break, right? So how do you reset? What does that look like? So that it doesn't have to like be in living color in front of the least favorite person, place that you want to have to do that. So I think, again, all that to me at least falls under prep. And the more you can kind of play out some of those scenarios, the more likely it won't be a surprise. And the more likely you'll just deal with it better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you said, like our different clients have, different comfort level with how they react to those comments. And, some will feel more comfortable saying, hey, please don't comment on my body, or like, that's not helpful. And some really will not feel comfortable saying that, and might just need to be prepared with like, conversation changers or, frequent bathroom breaks to just, decompress a little bit. And maybe just have a safe person that they know will be available to text. But
I think that's it, the safe person, without like making that sound too sort of dramatic or something. I think that's actually important because you want I think you probably have the best result. It's not always feasible, but you'll often have the best result if there's sort of this wingman, quote unquote, version of whoever it is that's going to help lead you around, right? Through some of these things. If you need it. If you don't, I mean, this should be an exposure. This should be a good exposure where you're working through things. So if you can do that, that's the preference. But if not, there's a backup in person who can help you. So that's another way to sort of mitigate. Obviously, that's going to require some planning as well. And so again, to me at least, it just goes back to a lot of prep and planning to see, okay, how can you work through this scenario?
Yeah. And for parents of kids that might be struggling, what can parents do to, prepare and try to make the holidays as, stressless as possible, and maybe potentially talking to some of that extended family if there's expectation of unhelpful comments?
Yeah, I mean, if it's, if it crosses a certain level, then maybe that should be considered, right? Because here you're almost weighing, are you actually going to have this person who has an eating disorder be present? Are they going to be willing to even show up? So if that's what you're comparing in terms of your options, and you really think that's a good thing, that's something you really want because it's your kid and, you really want this back on track, then it, I think, makes sense to start weighing, okay, who is really the core set of people that should be at this first, let's call it, coming out party? And maybe that's a little easier to handle. As opposed to, okay, we're going to do it natural, but natural is much harder to manage. And it's, maybe it's easy for you as a parent or other person without an eating disorder, but it's going to be pretty challenging. Especially like you said, if the person involved is in recovery, so there's, body image stuff that they're now dealing with. So the last thing you want to do is to accelerate the reactivity to that all on one go, right? So it's fine. The exposure is good over time. Yeah, it'll help. And they'll have to figure stuff out. But for all of that to happen in some 1 to 3 hour window, I think is a bit much and just not helpful. So
yeah, I think that's a key part, especially for if, it's a client that's newer into recovery and it might be their like one of their first few holidays going home and spending that time with family. I think it can definitely make a huge difference to, you know, make that kind of core group a little bit smaller and more manageable.
Yeah.
And then maybe, maybe the parents go off and, partake in like the bigger thing. And, maybe it's okay that the client doesn't partake in every single, family event that weekend.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Picking and choosing.
And so, we've talked a bit about what this looks like for clients that are kind of on the road to recovery and, it's already been addressed a bit. What would you say parents should kind of look out for, like might maybe warning signs they might notice that their kid is struggling with an eating disorder?
I mean, some of the as you know, as you've seen, and we've seen together in many cases, some of the first signs that are evident are not really about eating, right?
Mhm.
Like they could be depending on the disorder, right? So if it's somebody with anorexia, you're going to see the weight drop, or even that for many people is not that clear because
Yeah.
you see the person every day, and
Mhm.
so yeah, day by day, yeah, something's changing. So unless it's dramatic, you may not even see that, right? Or there's things that the person's doing that is covering that up, right? Like, oh, the clothes are kind of getting heavier, but unless you notice it or you go after that point, that may still not be obvious.
Mhm.
So I think that's maybe the other side to be aware of, is that these things are insidious, not easy to spot. It's not going to be some, sound of cymbals that's going to alert you. And so social isolation may be a good starting marker. I mean, obviously, it's also tied to mental health problems of other kinds, and all of those are important. So maybe that's a good starting point, because once you start seeing that, sure, this person's, oh, he or she is just a teenager, fine. But at some point, that starts to kind of veer off because it's breaking from their norm, your norm as a family. And so if there is that break in engagement and the break from their social group, right? So, which again, yeah, you may not know, right? Like you don't know how much or how little your kids are hanging out with their friends. I mean, I would say maybe you should know.
Yeah.
Not that you want to be the super nosy parent, but at some level, there's a lot of transitions happening in various ways. And I do think there needs to be something on the radar for parents actually to say, okay, do I have a sense, just a general sense of what is the social engagement looking like, right? Like, what is that looking like at home? What is that looking like in the outside home sphere? Maybe this kid is in sports and that's starting to become an issue. Maybe there's issues with physical endurance that there's like an issue with covering up. Grades are slipping, which is unusual for this kid who's normally totally fine at school, etc. Right? So all the spheres, but again, each element you're kind of picking up signals
Mhm.
that something is off. And unfortunately, these are all very general, right? None of these things, at least to the average person, screams, "Oh, eating disorder." No, not even necessarily mental health. So, but that's kind of where it starts. One, this may not be exactly where you're asking for, but I think one of the things that we've talked about, we try to discuss this with kids, families, um, family meals, right? So one of the most protective things, and there's lots of research about this. There's like articles out there that we've talked in. One of the most protective things you can do in this sort of lead up, or even just as people go through puberty, as adolescents and beyond, is family meals, especially if they're kind of set up in a way so that there's the expectation all around. So not just for the kids, the adults have to also drop their phones and they have to whatever do all the things that will basically get in the way of the family meals. So everybody does their part to make sure it happens. It happens at sort of a certain time window. It happens higher priority than basically everything else.
Mm.
Then that can become this habit that everybody's now attuned to, and then you will very likely see something being off,
Mhm.
right? I mean, obviously, from the fact of the person eating or not eating.
Mhm.
So that's really obvious because you don't even have to talk about it. You don't have to do anything about it. You just kind of do whatever you're doing and you'll start seeing it. And then everything else around that, right? Because how they present or how they're doing or not doing or feeling or what they talk about or even whether the social sphere enters the conversation, and all of that is pretty evident in a very direct, unfiltered way.
Mhm.
And Yeah, and I would argue some of that maybe even should be broader meals, right? Maybe this is your nuclear family. Yeah, include other people that are close. So the more there is that almost like testing of the ground, I think that's probably your best early warning system.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's, because I think often we don't see, a lot of times weight doesn't change at all. And if it does, it's typically on the slower side. And it may be really obvious if you have a kid, coming home from college and it's been 3 months, you might notice a drastic change. But if you're seeing them every day, it's not going to be very obvious if it's changing even at all.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is in just their interactions with family, whether they're withdrawing,
Mhm,
more irritable,
mhm,
um, wanting to eat in their room,
mhm,
which
mhm.
also is just being a teenager.
Yeah,
Um, but that might be, potentially the first of many signs that, the kid's having a hard time. Um,
yeah.
and then if you're noticing that, then you might also be able to notice some of the food stuff. Like maybe they're asking for different foods and all of a sudden they, quote, don't like, certain foods or, maybe they used to be really excited for Thanksgiving foods and now they're like, no thanks, I don't like it anymore. Sometimes it's things like that. And, tastes do change. But if they're
Yeah,
changing in a very specific way,
yeah.
I think that's a big thing to look out for.
Yeah, yeah, and the consistency of it, right? So if it's like every single time, there's always instead of the norm that used to be, there's always an excuse. There's,
Yeah.
oh, it's because of this. So every single time, there's sort of some reason.
Mhm.
But going back to the other point you made, yeah, just a teenager. I mean, and that's fine. I don't think there's much you can do about that part. But there does need to be maybe the attempt to kind of help with more open conversations
Mhm.
because in some ways that's the underlying route you have.
Sure.
Uh, because if that's closed, then everything else becomes harder. So
Yeah, even if you're just chalking up the isolation or, wanting to spend less time with the family to being a teenager, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be talked about.
yeah, and I think I do see that some amount because then that somehow falls in the bucket of, oh, we want the kid to have their privacy,
Mhm.
etc. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why you don't want to do the thing that feels uncomfortable as a
Yeah.
parent, adult, whoever. And so yeah, maybe that's fine in many ways, but if you're seeing the signals we're talking about in a consistent way, developing over time, there's all these other aspects that are also going off kilter.
Mhm.
There's very likely some kind of problem, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And the sooner you get to that, the better.
Yeah. And, we know from talking to a lot of parents and clients, often when those conversations try to happen, they often don't go very well.
Yeah.
The, the child, whether they're an adult or, an adolescent or younger, usually get really defensive when they're asked about, eating less or, seeing their weight change or whatever. How would you suggest parents start to broach that topic in a way that, might be received well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty tricky, right? Because I don't know, that I've seen a lot of examples where somebody said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to follow instruction set 1 through 6 and then I'm going to go do this and it's going to go well."
Yeah.
And it actually goes well. So, and of course, as I'm telling you this, I'm also thinking back to all the reactions of my own kids where they're like, ha ha, you're going to tell them what to do. And so there's a lot of reality to this.
Yeah.
There is no script,
Yeah.
unfortunately, at least a script that will consistently work. But maybe one of the things that can help is maintaining a certain level of flexibility around meeting the teen adolescent where they are, right? Like maybe that sounds very fuzzy, but generally speaking, what that means is there are non concerning, non eating disorder related, non mental health related things. Maybe that aren't convenient for you as a
Mm.
parent, adult, whoever, but are kind of important or maybe really important to the teen adolescent.
Mhm.
Um, Try to help with that. Try to kind of see what you can do there. And that, that's your give. So that then you can get something in return as like, hey, I'm just wanting to make sure things are okay. So like, can we go the distance on some of this other stuff that could be important for your health, right? So I think that kind of give and take is maybe the one strategy. So that's what I mean by meeting them where they are. And again, being a little conscious to like, you're not discounting the things that could be problematic by doing that. You're kind of being a little focused. And then if that's all too headachy and you don't really want to deal with it, yeah, pull in the pediatrician, pull in a psychiatrist, therapist, whoever, dietitian, whoever's in the mix, or maybe get one in the mix. Because yeah, I mean, not all this needs to be done by you, the parent, right? There's people who work with eating disorders all their lives who do this all the time. You don't have to become an expert. So just go get one of those people and see if they can help you navigate this. So that may be a much more efficient path to some of these things. And then at the end of that, oh, no harm, no foul. Okay, everything's kind of back on track. Great, keep moving.
Yeah.
And I think that actually doesn't happen as much as it should, because purely from a time investment, cost benefit, blah, blah, et cetera, ratio, that's probably best bang for the buck, right? Like imagine you intervene super early, you're turning the curve in the right direction in various ways, you're kind of done. And you've now dodged this massive bullet on what could have been what we see, right? And treat, which is years of all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So not that that's going to work every time, but it's if there's one thing that's really worth it, it's that. And I think that's maybe a big opportunity, because I really think there's a lot of fear around doing it, or labeling and stigma and this and that. And maybe the messaging is, we just want to make sure things improve and they go better. And they're probably not going to fix themselves. So how about we try to nudge that along? You wouldn't do that, for instance, the kids in sports and they're having this knee problem, injury, whatever. You're not going to be like, yeah, it's going to work itself out. Yeah, just go and go kick the soccer ball 100 more times and it'll be fine. Right? Makes no sense. So like, why would you do that with your brain? So I think it's maybe sometimes important to provide that context. And there's hopefully also the people you're typically seeing, such as at that age, pediatrician, et cetera, they either know what needs to be done, or they can access people who do, right? Like that's tends to be a big issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of things that, we talk to loved ones of clients about, especially think like spouses and friends of adults with eating disorders, often the kind of in for those conversations is not mentioning the food piece at all, not mentioning, hey, I noticed you aren't eating as much anymore, or you're not going out to eat with us. Maybe it's just, hey, notice that, you haven't been hanging out as much, or you're isolating, or your mood seems lower, you seem more anxious, because that's most likely happening, and the food is a part of it. But like you said, like if that's not what the client necessarily wants to change, maybe they'll want to change the other piece, and maybe that's kind of the in.
Yeah. Like going back to meeting them where they are, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, for any kind of movement to happen, there has to be a desire to engage on it.
Yeah.
And if mentally you're not there, you can try all these things, but and sometimes you may have to, just because things got so bad that then, okay, we've kind of gotten from preventive detection, blah, 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 to like, okay, now this person needs treatment, things are bad, right? So ideally you're trying to avoid that. But if we're still in that early phase and trying to suss out what's happening, then try to see what is an acceptable point of conversation. And maybe that's about function, right? And maybe that function is not what you think is the most important thing, right? Maybe you think, it should be this person's grades, or it should be, I don't know, something else, sports, or who knows. But maybe it's, this person wants to spend time, I don't know, hanging out with their friends who play in a band, or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's where that flexibility is helpful, because if it's in the direction of what the teen adolescent wants, you're much more likely to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So back to kind of connecting that theme.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, getting back to the holidays a bit, we've talked a lot about the challenges that they face, and, the issues that come up around the holidays. For everyone that's listening, what, more positives have you seen kind of come out of the holidays when, someone is in recovery?
Yeah, I mean, that's I'd like to have a long list of that. I don't know that that's what comes to mind. Long list of positives because somebody's gone to a holiday reunion because of prior history of eating disorders or current history of eating disorders. Um, that said, I mean, there are surprises, right? There are positive surprises because they're really fearful of hanging out with family or friends of a certain whatever time period. And now there's that re-engagement. And actually, this person in recovery has made a lot of great strides. And so they're able to actually move things in a good direction. And that leads to better interactions. That leads to this person in recovery feeling comfortable. The dread kind of vanishes. So so many ways, it's a true exposure. And the exposure worked. And it didn't work sort of magically or out of the blue. It worked because there was a lot of sort of growth prior, a lot of other exposures prior that helped make change. And this person's actually ready, even though they may not have felt that prior to that event. So to me, that's the best kind, right? Like, and yes, there are those, and thankfully, we see some of those.
Yeah.
So yeah, important to remember, and maybe that can be kind of the motivation to the folks that were pitching the other side.
Yeah.
To say, yeah, most people walk into this saying, oh, it's going to be horrible. But actually, there's definitely a subset where it's not. And it's much better than expected. So, like, let's try to shoot for that.
Yeah. So for anyone listening who, might be realizing that they need more support either for themselves or family, as far as next steps go, they can always reach out to us through our website, sunolhills.com.
Yeah. So SUNOL, Sunol Hills, HILLS .com, and reach out to our admission staff. They're used to getting calls for all kinds of things related to mental health, eating disorders, whole spectrum of stuff. And let us know how we can help if there's something you're not getting an answer to as well, because we really do want to be a one-stop resource.
Yeah. Yeah, I think our staff is not there just to get people in our doors. They're there to help you figure out what you need and what your next steps could be, whether it's one of our programs or not.
Yeah. And readiness and preparedness for some of those steps, because sometimes maybe you need medical stabilization, you need a bunch of other things that are different, separate, whatever. And our health system is absolutely challenging to navigate with these things because we're at the intersection of medical and psych.
Yeah.
So yeah, call our number on the website or send us emails through there, whatever is easiest.
All right. Well, that's our episode. Thanks for joining us today on Mirror Mirror. Please like, share, comment below if you have questions or ideas for future episodes, and we will see you next time.